Step into Paranormal M, where the supernatural reigns. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications for updates on our eerie adventures. Prepare for an experience that will haunt you. Experience in a cemetery. So the other night, my boyfriend and daughter, 3.5 years old, and I were walking in the cemetery. It's a few blocks from our house. We drove because we wanted maximum walking time with the toddler. We planned to play Pokemon Go. We entered through the main entrance, and after a few steps, I started feeling nauseous and worried, anxious. Didn't know why, just ignored it. We wanted to check out the huge headstones toward the middle, so we head that way. We notice a car parked with its lights off. No front license plate, passenger and back doors just wide open. The man is halfway in the back seat. He's parked on one side of the big headstone, which ended up being priests. We walked through and the guy noticed us. He closed the doors that were open, and then went around the driver's side and got in the car. Sat there and just watched us. So we veered away from him and went down a different path. My daughter all of a sudden says, "They're so loud." "Who?" "The rocks. They're talking to me." My mouth drops open. We didn't tell her anything about the cemetery or the headstones. She has no idea what they are other than big rocks. We ended up leaving as soon as we drove away. Well, yeah. My nausea also eased up. I told my boyfriend about feeling sick, and he freaked out and explained EMF to me. Pretty creepy. We went to a store and passed the cemetery on the way home again. His car was still there. He left after we pulled down our street we lived on. We've had one other paranormal experience with her before, which I will post. This was the second time that afterlife, ghost, spirits, or something exists and is confirmed for me. Later that night she was talking about the rocks again, and said that they were watching us. I said, "What did they look like?" She said shadows. She said they looked like this, then proceeds to make a worried expression. Told me that they couldn't walk with us and had to stay by the rocks. Were the spirits warning us about that man? Or is there maybe something not so good at that cemetery? The Ghost of Lou Gehrig. So this story needs a little bit of a background to paint the full picture. For those of you who don't know, Lou Gehrig was a Hall of Fame baseball player who played for the Yankees for 17 seasons. He also was the guy who died and is the namesake of Lou Gehrig's disease. Sorry for pronouncing that wrong in the beginning. All too familiar with this. So, Lou was an adamant fisherman and moved to our town and would spend his free time fishing in our bay over where we would catch some pretty big striper and bluefish. Back in the early 20th century, our bay always had water in it, but during the Great Depression they built a bridge to an island and did a lot of public works. So now at low tide we only have mud. This is going to be an important detail later on in the story. So, in 1941, Lou passed away at the age of 38. So this is where my part of the story comes in, and my dad's. So my dad gets up early for work and would always see this eerie figure fishing off the rock pier at the dock. We would always vanish with the fog, and my dad would just assume leave to go to work. I had never seen him before, but my dad mentioned this man he saw every morning at around 5 a.m., but we never really thought anything of it. Jump ahead to January of 2020. That's when I was working on a construction site and had to start waking up very early in the morning to go to Long Island by 6 a.m. Every morning I would see the man fishing in the fog. Never really thought much of it until one particularly snowy day at low tide. So, this morning I saw the man fishing on the pier, on a day where it was below freezing with high winds and snow falling. which I thought was pretty strange, but to each his own. While I was sitting in traffic on I-95, something clicked in my head that makes no sense for somebody to be fishing in these conditions. On top of the extreme cold, there's literally no water where he was fishing. Then I started connecting the dots and realized he's always fishing at the same time, with or without water in the bay, and always vanished with the fog. For a while, my dad and I were joking around about the ghost of a fisherman, but didn't take that really seriously or give it much thought. That was until we talked to some of our neighbors. They lived in the community a lot longer than us. According to the old-timers, they claim it's the ghost of Lou. I can't confirm these details, and I don't think anybody really can because I wasn't alive in 1941. But allegedly, Lou was a regular at that fishing spot and was a big morning fisher. According to my own research, the man would fish all day, so I don't know how relevant that is. And also, allegedly, the ghost didn't appear there until shortly after he passed away. Again, 1941, pretty hard to corroborate that. Anyway, I don't know if it's actually the ghost of Lou Gehrig, but I certainly hope it's a ghost. Otherwise, some poor soul has absolutely no idea you need water to fish. I went over to a small village near my town. After this, never again. Hi, I'm Achilles. I'm 16 and I live in Preveza, Greece. So please excuse me if my English is below decent. I like going on long rides with my bike. It's relatively new, so I usually don't have trouble with it, like the chain dislocating or something like that. Jealous. The last few times I went to ride my bike, I went to a small village. Pantokratoris. That's conveniently near. So I decided to go there. At first it seemed like it was a good idea because the moment I went there, the seaside view was amazing. It goes very nicely along with the fort there. After the fort and the park accompanying it, there's just a relatively big street full of small houses with a small port for fishing boats. If you go to the port with even more amazing views, there's a small forest full of olive trees near there. And by near, I mean right next to it. The forest is really small to be considered forest, so let's call it a small cluster of trees. Even though it's a small sort of range, it was full of darkness. It was pitch black under the trees, as if something was blocking sunlight from going under the trees. That little cluster of olive trees was somewhere I both wanted and didn't want to go at the same time. But I ended up not going. There was a fence. After going around the cluster of trees, I took a short, disappointed look at it. It's because I wanted to see how cool being there would be. I immediately regret it. I saw something move. I have myopia. Myopia. Jeez. 15 degrees to be specific, which is a lot, and because of that, I couldn't make out what was that thing that moved. I stopped my bike to take a closer look, and I saw a four-legged thing. At first, I thought it was a wolf that was really close, but it was far away and much bigger than a wolf. I didn't get a good look at it, but it looked like 2 or 3.5 times my height. The worst part is when it turned around. It was looking directly at me, as if it knew I was looking at it. That was the moment I determined it wasn't an oversized wolf. It had human eyes, human teeth, along with canine teeth, and a really long human nose. The lack of sunlight in the forest made it hard to see, so I might be wrong about some of the features. But its bright yellow glowing eyes is what scared me the most. It was like a ray of light that was coming out of its eyes and was being pointed right at me. The moment it started to move, I realized I had a couple of seconds to look at it a bit more before I should start booking it with the bike. It stood on 2 legs instead of 4, and it started chasing me, moving like a human. That's when I got on my bike and just went away as fast as I could. Didn't go to my hometown, I just wanted to get away fast. So without thinking, I went further away into the Pantocratorus, something like that. But that turned out a bad idea, because I saw another cluster of trees, and that's when I saw the true horror of the village. A very tall and skinny thing just standing there. At first, I thought it was a tree, but as I was moving with my bike, I saw it had 2 legs. When all of this was happening, it was 8 p.m., so there was still a bit of sunlight. Though when I saw the skinny figure, I realized the wolf thing wasn't chasing me at all. It never left its tree cluster. So I thought the same thing would happen with the pole-looking thing. Oh, how wrong I was. Its legs were larger than I thought. They went all the way up to its head. It had no torso. And that's when I saw its arms. Oh God, its arms. They started off normally, but as I looked further down its arms, they split multiple times, as if they were branches, but with fingers at the end. That moment was perfect for me to go as fast as I ever could on my bike and go back home. As I was almost out of there, I took one last look at the thing. It had the same eyes as the other monster, bright glowing yellow eyes looking directly at me. I almost fell off my bike when the thing screamed. It was a very low frequency sound, but it went up gradually. I know that this thing was screaming because it opened its god-awfully terrifying mouth. It was like its small, skinny head that looked like a straight line expanded like rubber to look like a sphere. After going home that night, which was yesterday, I decided to never go to that village ever again. I never told the story to anybody, because they would tell me to stop trying to scare them to piss off. If you'd like a Greek translation, DM me. I'll probably see it. I so apologize for my Greek, or lack thereof. The Halton Shoe Tree. I was 20 years old, and recently entered the gay dating world. I was seeing this guy for a bit, introduced him to my best friend. My date suggested that we all go on a late-night drive along the rich country estates and past a massive shoe tree. I recently had 2 pairs of worn shoes and boots I didn't need, so I brought them to add to the tree's collection. Despite my best friend's objections, I hung the 2 pairs of shoes. On the drive back to the city, my date Google searched the shoe tree at that intersection. Supposedly, people hang shoes on that tree to commemorate a couple that were murdered at that intersection about a century ago. The next night, my date took me to the movies. We drove back to my house and chatted in the car and at the end of the driveway. He was telling me about work when I noticed the porch light activate about 14 houses down the road. I noticed a figure in the driveway. They were very tall, and they wore a white, flowing sheet over their head with a distinct long sleeve. I pointed out to my date, and we both started getting a bit nervous as it's staring right at us and is unmoving. After about a minute, the figure turns toward the porch light. The light goes out, and the figure disappears. 2 houses closer to us, the porch light activates, and the figure's standing on the porch, swaying back and forth. The light goes out, and the figure disappears again. Again, 2 houses closer, the porch lights activate and the figure is standing in the driveway. At this point, we're freaking out and my date drives us away before it gets any closer. Eventually, I made it home, but I didn't get much sleep. The next day, my parents went out and I was loading up the laundry in the basement. I heard my dad's footsteps come back in the house on the main floor. Must have forgotten something. I heard him walk from the front door to the back door, back and forth, over and over. As I go to check it out, I hear my dad climb the stairs to the top floor. I reach the main floor, the front door is still locked, my parents are gone, and someone is in my house. I don't know where the courage came from, but I ran up those stairs to confront them. When I reached the top floor, it was silent. There are 5 rooms upstairs, and the bathroom in front of me is the only room that I can see inside perfectly. I run inside the bathroom and I lock the door. The footsteps start again from one end of the hall to the other, slowly getting louder and louder until they're stomping right outside the bathroom door. I yell, "Leave me alone!" and the stomping ends. My parents arrive a few moments later. These are the only two experiences I've basically ever had. All I know is I'll never throw old shoes in a shoe tree ever again. What in the world is a shoe tree? Shoehorn, shoe tree, question mark. Can my dead grandfather be cursing his own family years after his death? My maternal grandfather died last April of May 2013 due to diabetic complications. My grandma died years before him already. After his death, his children, Mom and my aunts and his uncles, 6 in total, subdivided their inherited land into 6 equal parts, just small lots, and they live in each. Years after, the eldest was experiencing financial difficulties. He was a public vehicle driver and was not earning much money, so he decided to sell his inherited piece of land. He had a vivid dream of my dead grandfather telling him that if he really would sell the land, my grandpa will give them a sickness or disease. Unfazed, my uncle pushed through. Well, it's just a dream, he thought. Sold his land. A few months later, he had a mild stroke. Same with my grandma back then. Ended up having his left side of the body paralyzed. Around 4 or 5 years ago, the 5th sibling had a stroke too. Got his head operated on, went back home, but died the next year. The 6th, the youngest sibling, also had financial difficulties. The pandemic plus health. He sold his land last year. Last March, he had diabetic coma and died. The 4th sibling was found having a seizure or unresponsive by his coworkers. He was rushed to a public hospital and needed a stroke. Half of his body got paralyzed. He was responsive and talkative when he woke up, but after 2 to 3 days he died. He had sold half of his lot last year due to pandemic-induced unemployment. The 2nd female sibling's husband got into a bad motorbike accident this morning. Hit his head really bad. He died at 3 p.m. at the hospital. My aunt said that last night her husband blurted out his intention to sell my grandpa's old motorbike, which their son, my cousin, bought when Grandpa died on Facebook. Are these just coincidences, or is my grandpa being, possessive of his earthly stuffs? Or is there something fouler afoot? What is that saying? Fool me once, fool me twice, fool me 3 times? I can see death. Sorry, kinda long. The first time I ever saw death was when I was 7. Before moving to the U.S., I lived in my aunt's house with my aunt's family, mom and sister. The house only had 3 bedrooms, so my mom, sister, and I shared a room with 1 bed. One night after watching a movie, I woke up to something I'll never forget. As I opened my eyes, I saw a shapeless figure on the upper corner of the room. All of a sudden, I began shaking, crying, and screaming in fear all at the same time. Even though I was afraid of what was before me, I just couldn't look away. I began pulling on my mom, screaming at her to wake up and to look. She couldn't see anything. I don't remember the rest of the night. A few days go by, and my mom's boyfriend at the time came over to watch a movie. In the same room where I saw that figure, we all sat down, my sister and I on the floor, my mom and her boyfriend on the bed. About 30 minutes into the movie, we began hearing a loud snoring sound coming from my mom's boyfriend. My mom began trying to wake him up, but it wasn't working no matter how hard she tried. After a few seconds, my mom's boyfriend fell on the floor and began spitting foam from his mouth and shaking uncontrollably. We call 911, he's taken to the hospital where he died. I promise this is all going to be relevant. Soon after the funeral, we had a pastor come into the house to pray over it. My mom told him what had happened. Well, to me, a couple of days prior to her boyfriend's death, not expecting it to be relevant. He then walked up to the room where I saw the figure and was shocked. He explained to my mom that what I had seen was the angel of death, and that explained why he died in that room. Although I don't see the figure often, when I do, something bad always happens. I've been seeing it again recently, and all I can do is wait for something to happen. Baby's cries in Dead End Alley. When we reached 10 years old, my cousin and I were allowed to play in the street, just outside my auntie's house. There was a busy lane which ran down beside the side of the house where all kids used to run up and down, kick a football around, rode their bikes, and generally just messed about. I liked it because I had a long walkway to practice pushing my wheelchair without the danger of the main road, and my cousin, our friend, and I spent hours just fun running and wheeling up and down that lane. There was a funny little dead-end alley that leads off that main lane which always had a weird vibe around it. There was only one house at the end of the dead-end alley, is all the kids used to call it. The house was different from all the other houses around it. The others were bright and colorful and cheerful, full of life with neighbors talking over fences with one another and always ready to tell us kids off, tongue-in-cheek, for making too much row, a typical slang term for noise in West London. Row. The house down Dead End Alley was always dark. Even on a sweltering hot summer's day, it always seemed to have a gloom hanging over it like a dark, ominous cloud. Obviously, we, being merely 10 years old, were banned by my mama and aunt from going anywhere near the alley, let alone the empty, abandoned house. Although my older cousin and his mates, who were 13, hung around Dead End Alley from time to time. They had the sole purpose of frightening his little sister, and me, with horror stories of the house and its imaginary monstrous inhabitants. Having heard rumors about the dark history of the house, although not knowing anything concrete, the house had its dubious reputation as a haunted house. One typical summer's day, my cousin and I were playing in the lane with our friends. We kept hearing a baby crying. Now, being in the middle of a council estate, it's not uncommon to hear a baby cry, so we don't really pay attention. However, as the afternoon wore on, the baby's cry became louder and constant, almost deliberate. That got our attention. We all decided to investigate the noise, so we stopped playing and began to look around. To our horror, after searching for the route of the noise, we realized that the baby's cries were originating from the front garden of the Dead End Alley house. One of her friends, who was slightly older, said that he would go nearer to have a look. We were all concerned by now it seemed obvious to all present that it was a real baby who was in distress. But everybody present also pleaded with him not to do it. But he was, and still is, a very principled, moral person, and his conscience overcame him. We waited for 10 minutes until he came back. He looked awful. His face was white as a sheet, and he looked physically shaken. He told us that he went into the garden, but there was no sign of a baby anywhere. His best mate asked him if he saw anything else, and he just nodded and said, "I don't want to talk about it." Nobody forced the issue, in fact, and I think everybody was secretly relieved about it. We left very quickly and returned to the safety of home. Years after, my cousin and I were talking to her mom, and she began to tell us about the history of the local area. The subject of the Dead End Alley house came up. We were horrified by what my auntie told us. It still gives me chills talking about it now. In the 1940s, the area where their family lived was way more rougher than it was present day. Lots of domestic violence, gangs, prostitution, and unwed mothers. Also, a high pregnancy rate, which is to be expected in some ways with that war. Along with it came a fair percentage of unwanted babies. It turns out that the house in Dead End Alley was a baby farm, where women took their babies and when they couldn't look after, or rather didn't want to. They gave them to women or couples, and for a fee, they would take these abandoned infants in and find good homes for them. It was said by the locals that the couple running the baby farm were, quite an unsavory pair. There were rumors at the time of coercion and intimidation of young unwed mothers to give the awful couple their babies and neglect and abuse their young charges. Then the scandal was uncovered. In the 50s, my auntie didn't know the full facts. The remains of several infant bodies were found in the front garden in a shed where the husband kept his gardening tools. The couple were obviously charged with murder, and because of the number of remains discovered, they were put away for a long time. We don't really know what the truth is of what happened on that hot summer's day long ago, but my cousin and I have our theories. My cousin still lives in the same house with her own family and my auntie, and every time my husband and I visit them, I still get the chills when passing by Dead End Alley, and our friend who went to look for the distressed baby, who my cousin and I are still friends with, has never revealed what he saw in the garden of the Dead End Alley house. You should ask. Looking back now, this place had some things going on. My family had always moved often, but out of all of the homes that we rented, this 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath was my favorite. We moved to this brick home in the rural parts of my state during the summer between 5th and 6th grade. My parents would eventually move out when I was about 21 years old and serving in the military. I think the reason why we lived there longer than any other home was because the rent was cheap, the owners were the best people on the planet, and we had open access for hunting and exploring on our own surroundings, 15+ acres. My dad worked tobacco and hay for the neighbors across the street after his 9 to 5 on the weekend to stay busy and raise a bit more money for us to live on. My mom could have her garden, not really so much house to keep up. My older brother, younger sister, and I would play in the basement, the old barn, and everywhere else we could get to. I really grew up in this place. To give a bit of background on myself, while I lived there, I was a homebody. I liked, and still do, my alone time to do whatever I wanted and enjoy a quiet house. So any time that I could stay home alone, I would. My brother off with friends, my sister off doing something with the church group, Mom out getting groceries, Dad in the fields. I had a lot of time to just hang out. Now this house, I'd always estimated that it had maybe been built in the 1950s or 1960s. Brick house, ranch style with a basement. Possibly the 70s. I just tried looking it up online, and popular real estate sites have no idea on it. All parts of the house seemed original to it. The kitchen, all blue half-bathroom aluminum storm doors. Single-paned wooden windows. All except for the additional room built on with old vinyl siding. Nothing really seemed out of the ordinary about this place. I remember on so many occasions in which I would be home alone working on some project in the old basement. That's when I would hear the storm door open and my dad's heavy boots walk through the kitchen to get lunch or something. I would go up and say hi, and there he would be. But there was almost just as many times when I would go up there and there would be nobody. No truck in the driveway, no nothing. But I heard it all. I spent many nights like this in the mid to late 90s, mind you, where I would stay up in the living room till 3, maybe 4 in the morning. I would stay up and flick through the dozen or so antenna channels. Nothing but garbage on television, but I would stay up anyway. It was quiet. The way the couch was situated, so I could see all the way down the hallway, and the television was against the wall, so that if I laid on the couch, I would see down that hallway right past my feet. In the hall was my 12 o'clock, and the TV was my 11. One night, somewhere between 2 or 3 in the morning, while watching TV and my household completely asleep, I saw her. An older woman in a dress, a white blouse, and hair in a bun, walking from the right bedroom to the left. I sat up, stared and listened for the bedroom doors to shut, but heard nothing. I eventually got up and checked the hallways. All doors were shut. I gently just rapped on the doors where I saw the woman go. My younger sister's room. No answer. So I gently opened the door. She was asleep in bed, hair down and in shorts and a blue tank top. Mom had short hair. I decided to go ahead and call it a night. I must have fallen asleep and just dreamed. I'm gonna go ahead and fast forward to years when my folks moved out of town and finally bought their first home. A place very much like the one I grew up in. It was Halloween of 2008. Many years had passed since seeing this old woman. I'd never once had thought of telling anybody about it, really. We decided to watch a ghost hunt live broadcast by some TV famous paranormal investigators, and our conversation turned towards personal experiences. That's when I brought up the old house. I told them, I've often wondered if the other house had something going on. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps, but found nobody home but me. Mom replied, Oh yeah, I've always thought that. Never wanted to upset you all, though. Seemed harmless to me, though. One time real late, I saw a woman in the hallway. My eyes must have gone wide, and I said, White blouse and a dress? Mom quietly, hair in a bun. I thought often about that conversation. And about a year later, after my interest had basically peaked enough that I wanted to try and investigate known hauntings, which I never really did, I was able to get in touch with the owners. Mom and Dad still had their numbers. I received the funniest answer from them when I asked about possibly checking it out for any, possible hauntings. Here's the quote. We miss your parents. They stayed there for longer than most of our other tenants. We have some good people in there now, and we don't want them to get scared away from someone asking about ghosts. He meant that in a sincere way, not a threatening or dismissive way. But I will say that you're not the first to have mentioned something to us about the place being haunted. He wouldn't say any more, but I wouldn't have forced it anyway. I left it at that. I'm all right with that being my answer. I'd driven past that piece maybe a time or two since. And yeah, getting teary-eyed at my fond memories there where I grew up. But every time I think about the place, I can't help but also remember what I experienced when I was alone. Note, all of this is true. I've recounted this several times to many friends. I always give this caveat. However, I always believe that a lot of things about what I experienced could be explained in many ways. I'm fascinated by hearing people's ghost stories. I hope that they enjoyed hearing mine. I've quote-unquote lurked on this sub for quite a while and finally decided to be brave enough to post my own. I'm a skeptical person when it comes to paranormal, and I believe there's more out there than what we experience every day. The story is based on my own experiences, which was backed up by someone else, my mother, who appeared to have witnessed something very similar. Knocking on the door, and how I got rid of it. Back when I was in college, me and my brother are living in the same apartment in Manila. Our room is at the back of the apartment building where the access to our water tank and the circuit breaker is. That's because this room is cheaper. The only way you get to our room is through a thick metal door. I am a nursing student, and sometimes I'm on night duty, so me and my brother don't see each other often. Then one day my brother was angry at me, asking if I was lending our keys to other people. I told him of course not. Why would I do that? He said, because I can't sleep last night. Someone keeps knocking on her door. I told him that's probably her neighbor's door that you're hearing, which is actually quite impossible given the location of her room. I find it ridiculous until it happens to me. It was in the afternoon and I was sleeping as I was from my night duty, when I hear someone knocking on her door. I thought it was my brother and I was mad. I ask him, "Don't you have your keys?" And when I open ours, no one's there. I still have my doubts. Maybe it's some kind of acoustic illusion or what. So I just ignore it, and it happened several times more. It even happened when me and my brother were in our room together. We're trying to investigate what it is, and after hearing the knock, we even rush to go outside, open the metal door, check if somebody's pranking us. Check if it's coming from somewhere else, maybe. We tried to find out what it is scientifically, but the knock is really coming from our wooden door. So I theorized a plan to get rid of it. Back when I was in college, we had to submit a thesis as a requirement. Me and my group were doing research in Manila, Boys Town. This is where minors who are in conflict with the law are sent. So like a sort of Philippine version of juvenile hall, I guess. And this place is said to be haunted. Though this place looks nice, full of trees, fresh air, it feels like this place is very depressing. Most of these children have a history of abuse from their parents or relatives, so you can see the psychological reason why these children had committed crimes. Some children even had committed suicide. But what makes this place more haunted is because of its building caught on fire and killing some children. So in my theory, one of the spirits of these children followed me. I think spirits are attached to extreme emotions, and that's why it followed me. I was emotionally disturbed at that time because I found out my mother's having an affair while my father's working abroad. I could also relate to these children as he was also a victim of abuse when I was younger. So what I did was I told the spirit to follow me again. I'm going to go back to middle of Boys Town, and we went back. I said a short prayer and went back again to her apartment. And guess what? The knocking stopped, and to be honest, it's not a scary experience for me. I don't know why, maybe the spirit's not evil. Hope these children eventually find peace here on Earth or in the afterlife. Childhood encounters. However, throughout my life, especially between the ages of about 8 and 18, I've experienced many odd and unexplainable things in my home. Some memories include: one night I was playing Xbox in my lounge, and my kitchen is visible if you turn around when facing the TV. On this night, I know for a fact I was not tired and I went to stretch, and when I did so, I could see a lady in a white Victorian dress, black hair, standing in the corner of the kitchen just watching me. I stared for maybe 10 seconds, and only when I looked away and back was she gone. This moment I'll never forget. Furthermore, often there's a chair outside in our courtyard, and I walk past. I used to often see a little girl just sitting in the chair, but when I look again, she's gone. Also, one night I was having a dream and maybe 5 people were standing around my bed, and I felt a pinch in my back that made me wake up. And the same 5 figures were standing around my bed in the exact same locations. However, they were all pitch black. Furthermore, my brother has told me of many experiences that he's had in his room at night, ranging from sleep paralysis and seeing figures by his door. Till this day, I refuse to sleep in his room or enter his room in the dark, as I always get a bad vibe from it. There's also been numerous times where my family would be sleeping and I would sound like a glass is being shattered in the kitchen. Our parents even used to blame us. But then they also saw that nothing was broken and that there's nobody even near the kitchen. There are other smaller events, but all these combined used to make me sleep with baseball bats. I used to be so scared. Only once I began researching into ghosts, poltergeists, and the paranormal did I gain some understanding and learn to just let whatever happen happen. I believe that as long as I do nothing to anger any spirits, they wouldn't really try to harm me. I have often had a great fascination toward the paranormal and feel as if I could sense things around me that some people can't. Also, take note that the house I live in is fairly modern, so these incidents or figures showing couldn't be explained by the history of the land or something like that. My father intervened and saved my life from the other side. What follows occurred in 2005, and I was going through a very messy and painful, for me anyway, divorce. In looking back, I remember fighting so hard for so long to keep together a situation which was basically a lost cause for years. I set the stage this way to help you, the reader, understand that for months as this dragged on, I was not in a good place at all. And so it was on a certain night, after another day of too many cigarettes and far too much dark anguish, that I laid there waiting to go to sleep. Sleep was difficult during this time for me, but at some point I did fall asleep. And at some point the following experience happened. I found myself standing in about a foot of fresh snow, which at the time I thought was really interesting since it was summer, and it was, well, summer in the waking world at least. The dream was lucid, which is not, well, particularly rare for me, in that I remember looking behind me and there were no footsteps in the snow. I didn't walk here. It was night, and based on the enormous tree line surrounding me, I could make out in the moonlight I was in the middle of some vast forest. In front of me was a small cabin, lit from the inside with smoke trailing from the chimney. It was then that I started to feel the cold, and so I walked up to it. I knocked on the door, and I was shocked when my father answered the door. He had died in the year 2000. We were extremely close. I couldn't believe it, and for a few minutes it was hugs and just tears, and somehow I had all these pictures of my daughters in my pockets all of a sudden. So I'm taking them out and I'm showing him, telling him stories, and he's patiently smiling. But I could tell that he was listening for my benefit, and it soon set in that he had seen every one of these moments of me and my kids, seen everything. I still hold on to this day that he watches over my girls, and now his new great-granddaughter. Something struck me, though, as odd. Once I began to take this all in, my dad wasn't the rustic type, and in fact, he hated camping. In looking around, I could see the place was filled with books, etc., and it sort of made it comfortable, but this didn't really feel like his place, if you catch my drift. I must have mentioned that because I watched his face change into something a bit more somber, and he answered, "It's because I don't really belong here. I'm supposed to be somewhere else." I didn't understand what he meant, and he must have read it on my face. He went on, "I'm here for you, son. I came here to this place to help you, but we're running out of time. You're here because I have something to show you." In the next instant, we're back in the snow behind the cabin. The moon was really bright, and I remember because I could see it pretty clearly. We were standing in front of this gigantic kennel. Had a high fence all around it. I was confused. It was then that I could see two large shadows moving in the shadows in the back. I began to hear the sounds that they were making, and I'll never forget it. It was like a growl and a whine at the same time. I think they sensed who I was or something because they shot forward into the light and I saw them for the first time. They were two huge black wolves, but so horrible looking. They were so enraged and at the time, so sick. Their hair was matted in filth and gone altogether in sickly patches with blood spots where they had bitten themselves or each other. They were throwing themselves at the fence, almost blindly to get to me. I remember they were biting at the fence until their mouths were bloody. Once or twice they bumped into each other, and then they would immediately tangle in a bloody, violent fight. Dark blood filling the snow. Somehow, I knew that this must have been going on for a very long time. The whole scene was so frightening, so repulsive, and so confusing. Again, this sort of thing was out of character for my dad, who loved animals. I asked him why he was doing this. Why are you keeping these things around? I remember my dad's face, so kind but pained to see, and he said, "Son, don't you understand? This is what I'm here for. In the middle of nowhere, hidden away out here, I am here to help you." He motioned to the kennel. "These two wolves are your anger and your fear, and they're tearing everything apart. I came here to keep them here, to keep you safe, but son, I can't hold them here any longer. You can't hold them here any longer. They will destroy everything. You aren't going to live much longer like this. I stood there in silence. Even the wolves had fallen silent, and I wanted to cry. All of it came into view. The beating myself up, the huge toll it was taking on me, my mental and physical health, all came up to the point where I was actually facing my own death. I knew that part to be true. I would be dead within days. All of it was because somebody didn't love me. But what was actually doing the most damage was, what was killing me was that I refused to love myself. I could tell by my dad's face that he saw me coming to this realization, and he smiled in relief. "Are you ready?" he asked. I was terrified that they would attack me, but I knew that there was no choice. With the whole world watching, it felt like I walked up with as much courage as I had, and I flung open the gate. With that growling whine that was deafening, the wolves leapt out of the kennel, finally free. They stood there for a moment, locking eyes with me, their hair standing on end. For a second, I thought they were going to kill me, payment for keeping them in a cage. And finally, without a look back, they charged together in the forest. Where they went, I don't know. I remember looking at my dad, not knowing what to do next. There were no more words, just a feeling that the experience was over. I knew that this place would never be here again for me, but my father would, which was more than enough. And it was when I woke up, and it was early morning, I felt mentally and physically drained, and somehow not the same. But there was also a knowing that the worst was behind me, that I wasn't going to die yet, and the wolves were released. Day by day, I slept better as the moving day approached. I found myself looking forward to a new life. My girls and I had the best adventures when we were together, and great memories we talked about to this day. I owe much of that turning point to my dad, who put himself in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, just to keep me from tearing myself apart. Seen something watching me as a kid that someone else also witnessed later in life. I felt like I was being watched for 13 years. What I'm about to discuss started happening from a young age and occurred until I was around 18. I would like to say I don't believe it actually happened, but the creepiness of it and how it made me feel for those 13 years has stuck with me. So I'd like to at least discuss it and theorize with people. It's pretty vanilla, but how it made me feel was definitely not vanilla. 1996, age 5. My mom always read me a bedtime story when she put me to bed, and I always fell asleep. This particular night, I didn't fall asleep, and she stayed with me for a while longer until she fell asleep herself. But I was still awake. I was kind of bored and just looking around the room. I looked up at the window positioned behind my bed, and even though the blinds were closed, I was able to see through the cracks in the turned-down blinds. I immediately seen 2 reddish eyes looking in. Thought they were eyes because I kept looking for a while, and they were moving around a little like they weren't completely stationary. And then they appeared to blink. I immediately turned over and I woke up my mom. She said it was just a dream to go back to sleep. But to this day, I swear I've never slept, and I was awake. My bedroom window is above our balcony, but you would have to be really tall or on a ladder to see into my window from it. I don't have any siblings. My dad was asleep when this happened. Not long after that, I did have a nightmare about what I saw. I dreamed that it was a wolf-like animal, and my dad was fighting it in the hallway to our bedrooms. I woke up and immediately knew that it was a dream, but to this day I still don't think what I initially saw was a dream. I developed a deep fear of the dark because of this. 2007, age 16. From 96 to 2007, I'd never seen any occurrence like what I saw that first time, but I switched to turning my blinds upwards so I couldn't see outside. For some reason, even before the nightmare, I had decided it was like a wolf-like animal. Not sure why. Still had a deep fear of the dark, and since it happened, I'd be intermittently having a feeling like something was watching me or I wasn't alone. Sometimes it felt like an unfriendly presence. Other times it felt comforting, like something was protecting me. I once went a year without getting the feeling, and it just hit me when I was driving home from a friend's house in the middle of the day. The drive from my friend's home was about 20 minutes of rocky barrens with patches of forest. An unfriendly presence hit me so hard that I pulled over, checked the car, and got out of the car. Climbed up a small cliff to the roadside to look out over the barrens, but there wasn't anything there. Got back in the car and kept driving. I visited this friend's a lot, and I started to find that feeling would just hit me at the exact same spot in those barrens, day or night, but only in the night around my parents' house. This same friend slept over one night. We went out on my deck so she could have a cigarette, and I got the feeling of an unfriendly presence. It wasn't her. At this point in life, I was screaming at myself that I was being irrational, that nothing was there. I didn't see a wolf-like creature, I just thought I saw it. As I was thinking this, I realized my friend was looking out into the small patch of forest behind my house, squinting. I asked her what was wrong. She said she could swear she saw something watching us and moving around, almost like a dog, but a lot bigger. At this point, I was shitting my pants and kind of coaxed her inside. I'd never told her about this story, so she would have never known about my speculations. 2009, age 18. Still haven't seen any evidence myself since I was 5. Only my friend's observation, which aligned with what I think I saw as a kid. I still felt like something was intermittently watching me, or both at home and on the drive to that same friend's house and even around where she lived. Started dating somebody that lived not too far from her, so we all hung out a lot. At this point, I'm still scared of the dark. Sometimes I could walk up and down a trail by myself and would be completely fine. Other times, I was crippled with fear and ran or had somebody lead me. One time, I was camping and I felt the presence so bad that I had to get my boyfriend to lead me to her tent while I shut my eyes and covered my ears. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every noise scared the shit out of me, and I didn't help really that other people were around. I remember driving home the next day, and I did feel like something was watching me, but this was one of those times that it felt comforting. More comforting than it had felt before, at least. 2010. Age 19. Driving over to see the same boyfriend, and I realized I hadn't felt that feeling like something was watching me in a long time. Probably since I had that last comforting feeling. I drove through the barrens almost every day without that feeling popping up. It was gone just like that. Moved away from my hometown soon after. Present day age 29. No more sightings. No more feelings like something is watching. My crippling fear of the dark went away, and even though the dark still makes me feel uneasy, I prefer to go for runs at night. I've lived back home for a while, but mainly lived in the city and have since moved out of the province entirely. To this day, I've never returned and appear to have just stopped abruptly, but it's probably the thing that's stuck with me the most over the years since I was a kid. Little Jimmy at the bakery. From 2008 to 2013, my uncle owned a bakery where I worked during my college years. Sadly, it closed when he died unexpectedly. The building itself was a very old one. It was basically just a long rectangular shape. We divided it up into about 3 rooms and added the actual bakery part onto the back. The first room where you walked in, obviously, was the storefront, with a door to the right that led to our quote-unquote cake decorating room. It's what it sounds like, a room where we would decorate cakes and store things and just use it as a general back room. Continuing through that room was the second back area with freezers and a storage closet and a mini office room divided off from that. Continuing from there through the original back door was the bakery. Anyway, that building had actually been a lot of things in its life. It was multiple bars, a hair salon at one point, and it was even a brothel. This was a place where some pretty famous gangsters also passed through back in the day. So even its basement had hidden rooms from the times of Prohibition. But this is all just a backstory for what the building itself is or was. As for what happened to us working there, it was just a lot of strange things. The first thing I can ever remember happened was like a cupcake holder flying across the room. We kept it on a shelf on the right side of the cake decorating room by the door. And one day we heard a loud crash that scared the heck out of us. Me and my coworker went back there to see what fell or broke, and to our surprise, we found the cupcake holder all the way across the room by the other door laying on its side. We didn't think much of it though, as, well, before we would even suspect a ghost or whatever. The second event occurred maybe a year or so later, and it happened in the middle of the night while my uncle and the other staff were baking. One of our coworkers turned around to see what appeared to be a little boy in like an old-looking hat. It freaked her out, but apparently she was part of some ghost hunting team and said that she was used to this sort of thing, she said. That night I remember me and my parents went over there as well, but of course we didn't see anything. After this, things started getting a little bit more weird or annoying. Things would randomly go missing and show up in other places. We'd hear loud footsteps in the back as somebody headed to the front. But rather than opening the door and walking to the storefront, they would stop at the door and nobody would be there and we'd open and look. Same thing would happen a lot in the back room as well, where you'd hear somebody's boots climbing up the ramp from the bakery, but then vanish at the top of the ramp. Eventually, my uncle started calling it Little Jimmy. Whenever something weird would happen, we would just blame it on him. Strange things like this continued for years, up until we had to close down. Now the place has been reopened as yet another bar. Can't help but wonder if they experience the same things as well. Check it out. Ouija board experience. One night, me and my coworkers decided to play with the Ouija board. We did it outside of work. We talked to a girl named Quinn who said she was a demon. She seemed pretty cool till towards the end of talking to her, and we decided that we needed to head home because it was like 2 a.m. But she wouldn't let us say goodbye until we promised if we ever used the Ouija board again that we would talk to her. About a week later, the plans that we were just sort of worked on caught fire. Or, not the plans, but rather the place. So a few days after that, we go to the lake and use the Ouija board again and asked for Quinn. We asked if she started the fire, and she told us that she did. And then it seemed like Quinn got scared or overpowered because the board started acting up. It spelled Zozo, and then started counting backwards. We quickly said goodbye and moved the planchette to goodbye as well, and about 2 weeks later I was driving to my friend's house. I should mention that the friend was a girl and I was seeing at the time, and she was cheating and using me. I didn't know this at the time. I guess Quinn knew because she seemed mad, protecting and jealous when me and my friends mentioned the girl's name the first time we used the Ouija board. So on the way to her house, I hydroplaned and flipped my truck. I had to add the Ouija boards in the truck. Some people driving down the road stopped to help get the door open, and I climbed and got out. When the cops arrived, they made sure I was okay and said that I had to write me a ticket just because of the accident. I don't have the ticket anymore because this happened about 4 years ago, but the address site of the accident was Route 666, Virginia. Weird-ass encounter on my college campus. To give a little background, I go to UNCA, which is located in the Appalachian Mountains. Creatures such as bears and possums are often spotted walking around the campus, which kind of makes the college experience more exciting, especially when you're walking around at night. So one night at around 11 p.m. I decided to go outside and walk around the track field that's adjacent to my dorm building to clear my head and stuff. Keep in mind that I've done this plenty of times before, and I've had no weird experiences until that night. So I started walking laps around the track, and by the time I made my third lap, I came up to this part where to my right's a steep slope with bushes covering it. Getting closer to it, I start hearing what sounded like something moving in the bushes on the slope. I would have had to really take notice of it, or rather if it weren't for the fact that it sounded like footsteps. Like usually if it were a small animal, the noises it'd make while moving through bushes would be lighter and more scattered. So, I immediately came to the conclusion that I was probably facing a black bear. I should probably have my first encounter with one now. But as I continued to stare into the bushes, I saw no movement whatsoever. The footsteps sounded like whatever it was should have been on the slope, and yet I saw no black mass moving through the bushes, nor any bushes moving really around at all due to the movement. Something that I also noticed was that the footsteps sounded very human, and they were at a consistent slow beat. So at this point, I'm freaking out because I have no idea what the fuck is walking or crawling through those bushes. So, like the white dude I am, I decided to yell out, "Hello, anybody there?" As soon as I said that, the footsteps stopped. This deafening silence lasted for about 10 seconds before they resumed again. But this time they sounded like they were getting closer, and yet I still saw no signs of movement. Scared shitless, I finally gathered the courage to bolt the fuck out of there and just got to my dorm safety. Again, I have no idea what it was, but never really saw it. All I know is that it was something big. I've heard enough stories to know that there's definitely weird creatures like wendigos in Appalachia. Not sure if that's what was stalking around in those bushes. What do you guys think? I didn't know that saying hello to things was a white person thing. I think that's an every person thing. Or a less than scared person thing? Strange. People predicting their own death. I've been very intrigued by this phenomenon. I've had two people I was close with, unrelated individuals, who predicted their deaths fairly accurately, within a few weeks of the event happening. One example was my friend who was 35, who just talked casually about dying soon and alone without a wife and kids. Never seemed to bother him, but like it was more of a statement of a fact. Sounds familiar. He told me the last time we hung outside at work, and he said he was glad that he got to know me and I was a good dude. No terminal illness or anything. Died a couple of weeks later in a car wreck. The other was a friend of mine that was 28. He one day looked at me and told me that he didn't think he would make it to 30. No medical conditions, no dangerous lifestyle or hobbies. Run-of-the-mill career and uneventful life. Died about 2 months after his conversation to a brain aneurysm. Died about 2 months after this conversation to a brain aneurysm. Fast forward to now, and I think I understand how they felt, although my situation is a bit different. For about the last year, I, a 29-year-old male, have been having similar thoughts and feelings. Things like the fact that I won't be around much longer. I'm not afraid, which is weird, and I'm not depressed or anxious. No history of it. It's just this feeling I have. Super strong and hard to shake. Long story short here is I should have died when I got sepsis and I got into my bloodstream 4 months back. Now, next week, I'm undergoing surgery that requires me to be put under general anesthesia. Granted that this is generally a safe thing to do and millions of people do it yearly without harm. And again, I'm not nervous, but it feels like this is it for me. Almost like the end of the chapter or closing of a book. I didn't just start thinking about this because of the surgery coming up. I'm sure that's what you're thinking. It is not. I hope I'm not right, but just in case, I'm writing this for my wife and kids, separate letters, just to, well, in the event of my passing. I will mention these feelings to my wife in the letter, but not to my kids. They're young still, under 10. I'll make sure that they're, just loved. I'm almost as skeptical as they come when it comes to paranormal things, along with religion and such. But some things are hard to ignore. I'll try to remember when I wake up to comment here. If not, well, yeah. If I forget, just check my post history. Anybody else ever have a loved one or somebody close to them predict their death within a reasonable margin? Out of the corner of my eye. I was debating on whether to post this or not. I believe the more attention you give something, the more likely it is to manifest itself. I eventually forgot about it, but it creeps into my mind every couple of days, and now I'm genuinely curious. I try to be as logical as I can when I have an experience or something out of the ordinary happens to me or around me. I always look for an explanation, mostly to calm myself. Every once in a while, I'll be sitting at my computer desk and notice something out of the corner of my eye. I always get a little rush of nervousness, and when I do, I always can tie it to something, like a shadow from the ceiling fan or my reflection on my turned-off TV screen. When I do notice something, I don't particularly rush to turn around to see what it was, since it happens enough to where it doesn't really concern me for whatever reason. But this time was different. I was on PlayStation talking to a friend when it happened, and I turned very, very quickly to my left. A little context: to my left is my living room, the TV facing me, the love seat couch facing towards the TV, so its back is facing me. I see what appears to be a figure standing looking at me and quickly falling, but falling to its side, so the couch is covering it when it goes down, blocking it from my line of vision. Now, this was only for a split second, but I still remember very vividly the description of this figure. It was a girl, maybe 4'8", maybe something like that, wearing a white sleeveless dress with very slim arms. She had what seemed to be a plague doctor mask on, with a Native American headdress on top of it, mainly just the feathers. When I saw this, I went dead silent as the biggest fear I've ever felt came over me. My friend on PlayStation kept talking, and I didn't say anything because, like I said in the beginning, I believe we can manifest things, and I did not want that to be the case. I never give these types of things the attention they deserve, but I knew I had to walk over and check it out. As I walked over, the fear got bigger and bigger. I kept telling myself nothing should be there, but also that something was there. When I got to the front of my couch, where it should have been, nothing was there, and it was almost confusing because it felt like something was at least, should be there, right? Didn't talk about it in my apartment, but mentioned it to a couple of friends, and they are split on this. What gets me is this super scientific description that I just couldn't really make out. I don't have a connection to anything, or that it was wearing, or not even games I play or shows I watch. Has anybody seen something similar or had an experience like this? Haunted trailer home. 0 years ago. That's a lot. I lived in a haunted trailer with my ex-wife and 2 daughters. It was an old, ugly trailer colored yellow with brown trim. Had a carport and a porch. The deck was falling apart, so we dismantled it nail by nail. The trailer was made in 1973. At first, things were fine, but after a few months we started to notice things going missing, like my Ambien and my left shoe. They would turn up in the oddest of places, too. Then the doors slamming, the toilet flushing even after I had my uncle, a plumber, replace the inside parts. One day, my oldest daughter at age 3 was having a conversation with something in her room. I asked her who she was talking to, and she said that our baby brother and he didn't come along until 2008. Then there was a shadow man that would just come out at night. One night I was on my desktop in the middle of the trailer, and I got up and looked toward the back bedroom, and I saw a cloaked, hooded black figure. It looked at me and then went further into the bedroom. I ran in there but found nothing, but now my ex-wife's sleeping. You would also notice a black smoke coming from the bedroom closet. We had a female friend who stayed with us when she had National Guard drill who pretty much noticed this activity herself. My mom was babysitting one night when we went out for our anniversary, and she said that she felt like she was being watched the entire time. After a while, we started talking to the entity, and things like what's new or how's your day or, the activity pretty much stopped as long as we were like this. Eventually, we sold the trailer. Not sure if there's any more activity going on. Watch out for Ambien. It'll mess with you. White, iridescent green-colored flash of light illuminates entire room at Moana Surfrider Inn. This is an entirely real story. In July of 2019, I went to Hawaii with my then-girlfriend, now wife, for a vacation. The first night there, we lay kind of jet-lagged, talking about nothing. It was very late. I had my eyes closed, and I'd been suffering from severe anxiety recently, which led me to pretty initially ignoring the sudden burst of light which bled through my closed eyelids. Gave them a reddish color. Shine a flashlight on your closed eyes, and you'll see what I mean. My past experience with extreme anxiety had led to some strange occurrences. Being woken up hearing my name being called, or feelings of being thrust into my headboard. When anxiety gets bad enough, it can really mess with you. I was ready to ignore this light burst, but my girlfriend then asked me, "What was that?" I held a contained altitude typical of anything I assumed to be supernatural and expressed relief that she saw it too. Hold on, you held a contained... Oh, I thought you said altitude. Still sounds weird and AI to me. She had her eyes open, and according to her, the room just got very bright for a quick moment. Snap your fingers and it was that fast. She described it as green and bright and may as well have been white. What makes the story even crazier is that Moana Surfrider Inn is listed as one of the most haunted hotels in America. I swear to you, I did not know this prior to looking it up during the days following this event. Also, we had blackout shades on the windows. This was not an errant light that flooded our room from the road below. This was, as far as I can tell, a genuine encounter with the spirit. Some other events took place while sleeping here, but nothing as significant or as obvious or real as this was. This story, along with a couple of others that I tell, makes my eyes well up with tears, makes my hair stand on end and my skin become covered with goosebumps all over. Sharp and intense goosebumps that almost make me feel cold. Guy went extra in on the goosebumps. Every time I would fall asleep, I would be jerked awake immediately, feeling often that I was being grabbed, and there was always a disturbing image associated with this disruption. I felt a heavy darkness around me. I felt tingly, almost around my head, and like there was a swirling of energy. I felt like a kid again, not wanting to move. This went on consistently for about 30 minutes, and then I decided to take a sleeping pill. I'm very sensitive to medications and was soon asleep, sleeping throughout most of the night. I woke up the next day and left right away to get driving. The problem I'm having is that ever since that night I've changed. I'm constantly paranoid and looking over my shoulder. Very depressed and periodically crying multiple times throughout the day. I feel off and out of sorts, not connected to reality, not functioning. I don't feel alone when I'm sitting here alone right now. I feel as if this thing has attached itself to me. I've asked it to leave multiple times, and today's day 3 of feeling this way. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you and also ask for any advice. I need to fix this immediately. You heard him. Motel Paranormal Experience. Seeking advice. I grew up in a very haunted house with lots of activity. My aunts, uncles and cousins, friends, siblings, and parents all have very interesting and disturbing personal stories. And now I'm questioning why I haven't shared any of those yet, but the point is I'm familiar with paranormal activity. Here's what happened to me 4 nights ago, and why I'm seeking help. I spent 3 days returning home from vacation. On day 1, myself and another drove about 10 hours to our first overnight destination in Sheridan. For some reason, I was feeling very down and depressed. I've been very stressed in my everyday life, and the thought of going back to that after a beautiful vacation was weighing over me. We booked a motel online quick at the roadway inn. When we arrived, the place was very clean. I was pleased to be there after a 10-hour drive. This particular place had a main room with a bed, a TV, a couch, a bathroom, and an additional door that led to another small room with a bed. I opened the door to the adjacent room and immediately felt a heavy, dark, and sad energy. I shut the door and said, "Nope, you can sleep in there." I've often felt energy in rooms I didn't like, so I shrugged it off after that and I chose not to sleep in there. Shortly after, I decided to take a hot bath. As I was taking a bath, I felt an extreme wave of sadness come over me. I began sobbing. I chalked it up to my feelings of depression that day, but it's definitely not normal for me. I immediately got into bed and tried to sleep. I was exhausted from hardly getting any sleep at all on the trip, so I was falling asleep quickly.